from what I understand, God provided for Elijah before he was even born. Tell us that story.
Yeah, so around the second trimester, you start getting excited, start sending texts to people saying like, hey, we're having a kid. You're all pumped and jammed. And we got a routine blood test back, and it was by far the worst result you could have seen.
How far along is she at this point?
Somewhere in the second trimester.
Wow.
So, we're sitting there thinking that we just had a miscarriage, and we're super excited for what God had for us. And we were dealing with the grief of potentially losing our child. And I remember sitting in my living room going, I have been a Christian for the majority of my life. I'm on staff at a church. I tell people about Jesus every single week. And now I actually have to, believe what I say.
Hey friends, this is Pastor Kyle. Welcome to a series in our Life in Motion podcast we're calling Life Stories. We are in a sermon series about people encountering God and how it changes their lives. And so we don't want to just tell stories from 2,000 years ago. We want to share stories about what God is doing today. So we're sitting down with staff members and asking them, how, where, and when have you encountered God in your life? And we hope that these encourage you with whatever you're going through, or just give you one more reason to praise God in wherever you're going through in your life. So today we are interviewing Justin. Justin LaHiff is our tech guy, and he works behind the scenes, but he has a front row view of what God is doing. But I want to start with you not as a tech guy. I want to start with you as a dad, as a husband, and part of you that folks may not know. Tell us a little bit story. Your son's name is Eli. Tell us the story behind how and why you named him Eli.
Yeah, so when my wife was pregnant, the first thing that you do as a couple is try to figure out names. And we came out with girl names very easily, and we could not figure out on a boy name. And
Kyle wasn't an option?
Unfortunately, no. But yeah, and we're sitting there talking, and my wife always loved the name Elijah. And I went, I really am not fond of that name. Like, that's just not speaking to me. And we're going through the season of, she's pregnant, and we start doing the math, like every couple trying to figure out like, okay, daycare costs about X amount and all of the different financial stuff. And we're starting to realize like, it's going to be a little tighter than we would like in certain areas. And so, I don't get stressed about a lot, but finances stress me out. And we're like, as the staff, we went on a pray and play one day. And that's where our staff takes a whole day dedicated to staff bonding with each other and the Lord. And the first half, we went off and did our own things and just spent some time in silence and solitude by ourselves, just hearing what God had for us. And I feel like every time God speaks to me, it's always through a random passage in the Old Testament. That's just been his MO throughout my life. And he brought me to a passage in 1 Kings where Elijah walks through a town and meets a widow. And the widow has no finances. She's broke. She has her own son who is basically on his deathbed. And she asks like for any kind of assistance, for food, for water, for anything. And he blesses her and fills up a container full of flour and a vase full of oil and says, as long as I stay in your house, you will have provision. And that story just resonates.
Say that phrase again. That's good.
Oh, as long as you stay in my house, you will have provision.
I think it's so good. I have never met a couple in the process of having kids who is not afraid about finances. We're also afraid of a million other things. So I think that word is so good. What was it? As long as you stay in my house, what was it?
You will have provision.
That's good. Keep going.
Yeah. So that story just really resonated with me going, God might not cut us a check for $1 million in the mail randomly, but throughout every season, he's going to watch over us and take care of us. And every single time finances started looking a little tight or, a situation with daycare would come up and we were just curious and confused about what's next. How are we going to afford this next increase? How are we going to adjust our lives? God has responded over and over again in unique ways for both of us, from Nicole moving districts all the way out in Rancho to Roseville with a sizable increase with a job that she didn't think that she would really like, going from 2nd grade to 5th grade. But it turned out to be absolutely her sweet spot, reinvigorated her for teaching, to me coaching students over at William Jessup University on how to do tech for theater and different things like that. God just has paved ways and ways that he can only provide. So it's been kind of remarkable to see.
You talk about remarkable provision. Tell me if I'm remembering the story right. I think at one point you guys had to scramble for daycare providers, which is, again, all parents want what best for their kid, and who they entrust with their kids a big part. But daycare has been so expensive. Is it true that in this economy you actually found a daycare that was cheaper than the other one?
Yeah, our first daycare, it was a retired grandma that started it because she just loved kids and wanted a good daycare for her own kids when she became a mom. So she started it and was running her own daycare for like 30 years. And she literally just covered the cost of taxes and food for the children. And that was it. And that's not our current place, but that was our first place.
Yeah.
And that was a great first spot for him.
But you were in the house and you saw the provision in all of these different ways. But from what I understand, God provided for Elijah before he was even born. Tell us that story.
Yeah. So around the second trimester, you start getting excited, start sending texts to people saying like, hey, we're having a kid. You're all pumped and jammed. And we got a routine blood test back, and it was by far the worst result you could have seen. Like, we were sitting there and just wondering what happened. And we knew it was bad too, because literally as soon as Nicole's Sutter app got the notification that a test result came up, her doctor called and scheduled an emergency ultrasound for literally the next day in the morning. So we both took time off work, went in, and we were sitting there that night just thinking that we had lost our son. And
how far along is she at this point?
Somewhere in the second trimester.
Wow.
So, we're sitting there thinking that we just had a miscarriage, and we were super excited for what God had for us. And we were dealing with the grief of potentially losing our child. And I remember sitting in my living room going, I have been a Christian for the majority of my life. I'm on staff at a church. I tell people about Jesus every single week. And now I actually have to, believe what I say. And I remember just sitting there going like, God, whatever you have for me, like whatever this is, just walk with us, And I remember begging God to literally heal my child and save his life. And we walk in the next day to the ultrasound, and the tech that was there could obviously see the worried expression on our face and the grief that we kind of held in our heart as we'd had hoped for the best, but we also were well prepared for the worst outcome. And we asked her, how's it looking? And she's like, legally, I can't say anything. And then she did something that I don't know if she's allowed to do this or not, but I am more grateful to this woman than anybody else. And she pressed the little button where you could hear the heartbeat. And that was the first time that we had really actually spent time hearing it. And two, that just like the wave of peace and just God's favor resting on us going, we don't really know to this date if it was just a really bad test or something happened or, what happened, but I'm fervently in the camp of God did something miraculous with my son, whether it was truly saving his life or just bringing me and my wife way closer together. Like, I will never forget that experience.
Wow. And now, how old's Eli now?
2.
As you're raising him, what is your hopes for him? And what is the type of church that you want your son to grow up in? What is your heart, both as a dad and as a member of a church staff? What is your heart for what your son will experience here at Life Community?
I just hope that he goes to a church that loves him, that knows him, and that he's excited to go to. And it's kind of crazy, but that's already happened. And it's not just because, he's a staff kid or anything, but his favorite place is church. He asks every single week, like, Dad, can we go to church? He looks at me and goes, Dad, at church? I'm like, yeah, we'll go on Sunday. He's like, why aren't we going today? And everything from doing that to like, he loves listening to worship music and like the live stream and whatnot. And it's honestly kind of funny, but yeah, I just hope he grows up in a church that knows him, loves him, and cares not just about him, but his spiritual walk. And so I truly feel like we have that here.
Oh, that makes my heart come alive. That's taking a deep breath there. That's one of those proud Papa moments as a pastor of a church, seeing how God is at work. But I'm curious, how did you end up here at this church, and how did you end up on staff. And what was that process of your call to ministry, that sense of God leading you? We're talking about life stories and encountering God. What was your journey towards ministry?
Yeah. So growing up, my mom went to church, so that meant me and my twin sister went to church. And my dad has never really been a big believer, so he stayed home and watched football on the couch on Sundays. And we always went to church, and we started going to Bayside Granite Bay when they opened. And then this church was Bayside of West Roseville at the time, and it literally was right across the street from our house. So we went, either we go to this church meeting in a middle school, or we drive 30 minutes into Granite Bay. So we went to this church, and I bounced around between here and Granite Bay as this church got established. And in 5th grade, my parents got divorced, and it was an extremely messy situation. My father had an affair, and it just really tore the whole family apart.
Sorry.
And I remember just being, even, that young, just going like, I've been to church. Like, I didn't have the full comprehension of like, good things can happen to bad people. So I was just sitting there wondering what's happening, and, trying to pray and going like, okay, God, heal my family. Because honestly, at the time, I didn't really know what had happened. I just knew my family was apart, and I didn't really like it.
Yeah.
And, nothing really happened. And we still went to church every single Sunday. And then the more that we went to church, honestly, the more my faith kind of fell apart. Just going, I don't really see any evidence of this working. And throughout the time, I ended up having a mentor kind of by force, not by choice, because my mom was super heavily invested. So she had the children's pastor at the time actually like kind of walk with me and mentor me. And we met up weekly trying to do Bible studies and stuff. And I was the most rebel kid you could imagine. Like, report cards, just, F and D's throughout the world, just angry at everybody, all the typical things that you think about an adolescent rebelling. I was the textbook child for it. And we were talking, and we had been together for probably like 2-3 months at this point. And I remember just telling him like, hey man, I'm done. Like, we've been talking for a while. Like, church isn't for me. Jesus isn't for me. And this was around 7th to 8th grade at the time. And he went, okay, that's totally fine. However, I bought tickets to like a worship concert, and because I spent money, you're going with me. It's tomorrow. So if God doesn't meet you there, you can tap out. I won't say another thing. And I was like, fine, cool. I liked hanging out with him. I didn't want to talk Jesus. This sounds great. I went to the worship night against my will, but also kind of looking forward to it, going, I don't have to spend time with him anymore. Like, I like the guy a lot. Don't let me fool you. The guy was great, but I just didn't want to talk to Jesus. And at that worship night, I remember just feeling, for the first time in my life, feeling like God was present with me and what the love of God felt like. And I gave my life to Christ that night. And I remember that was a Saturday night. And the way I remember that was on Sunday morning, I went, I want to feel that again, but I have no idea how to. And at the time, the worship pastor came up to me and was like, hey, Justin, I heard you're good with computers. You're going to do lighting for me next weekend for a Sunday.
Is this the same guy that took you to the worship concert?
No, completely different. So kids pastor took me to the concert, and then the worship pastor just randomly came up to me. And I was like, okay, like I got told to do it. So like, I feel like I kind of have to. And so I spent that whole week at the church kind of fretting, worrying what's going on, and trying to figure out what's going on, like working with lights. I had never done that before, as a 7th grader. And I remember that next Sunday going, I feel the exact same way that I felt that initial Saturday when I gave my life.
So you go from, I will go to this concert as a way to be done with this guy, done with exploration of faith, but instead you give your life to Jesus. You spend every day the next week in church, and the following Sunday, while you're helping lead worship by doing lighting behind the scenes, that's where you experience God the same way you did in that worship concert. And those were the things that kind of cemented this relationship with Jesus in you.
Yep.
Is that how you started and then continued in, again, AV ministry?
Yeah. I started doing that every week because apparently once I stepped up one week, the guy that was running it was moving. So it was just like a temporary fix type of deal. And then after that, I kind of, I feel really lucky in my life that I feel ever since that moment, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my life and knew what calling God had placed on me at such an early age.
No way.
So I just got around as many people as I could. I started not only volunteering for this church, but Bayside Granite Bay, just trying to learn everything I could and learn from some really incredible leaders over the time there.
Shout out those two guys, the kids pastor and the worship pastor, if you will, the ones that you were maybe trying to dodge. Who are their names?
Jeremy Drew and Brandon Yip.
Jeremy Drew and Brandon Yip. I think it's so powerful. We have no idea what our words, our investment, our commitment to folks will actually turn out. I'd imagine Jeremy's like, maybe feeling like a failure, but there you go. Or maybe, Brandon, who knows if he was desperate or if he really saw something in you. And I think, those might be the four most powerful letters in the alphabet. I see in you. And when that happens, it's amazing. And now here you are, how many years later?
Oh gosh, I don't even know. Like at least 12, 15, something like that. It's been insane.
So 12, 15 years later, you have run tech for more services than I could count. If I was better at math, I could figure it out. But let me ask you this. Behind the scenes, where do you see and encounter God? I think it'd be very easy to feel like you're not part of it because you're pressing buttons, you're worried about timing, you're thinking about everybody else's experience instead of yours. How do you see and experience and encounter God in your role running tech?
Two ways. I see God through literally my role because to me, doing AV is worship. So being able to, it's not just about getting something perfect or something right, but being able to perform this kind of art that is very unique and helping others kind of see what's going on and helping kind of paint the scene where you can walk into church and not really think about the rest of your week or the bills that you got to pay, where you can just really have this moment with God. Like for me, the biggest thing is I want to create a moment that created the moment for me. Like I think about all those years ago sitting, we're Rebel Without a Cause on a Saturday night. I want to be able to create an environment where somebody like that can meet Jesus.
Wow.
So to me, that is really my goal, right? Like every single Sunday, that's what I hope for. The other biggest thing is when you do AV, you have to be observant of watching every little thing, but watching people worship is by far the most rewarding experience. Because you get a front row seat to what God's doing. For instance, I will never forget, I was down at a church in Menlo Park for their, for lack of a better term, summer camp for kids. I forgot what they branded it for, but we were sitting there working this event for all these kids, and they had brought in some actors from the local college for their skit. And it was just more of a community service type of gathering where they put out a call sheet. Anyone that had community service hours had to be there because they had some connection with a college. This kid walked in and totally anti-church, totally atheist, did not want to be there, made it very apparent that he was just there because he had to be for some obligation reason.
Like you at that concert?
Exactly. And throughout the week of, telling the story of Jesus, his life, death, and, him being raised again, on Friday, they did a altar call, and they asked everybody in the room who had gave their life to Christ to raise their hand. And in the back, John was sitting there raising his hand as that college student. And that just re-cemented to me, there are people like me in every service, no matter what you're doing, whether it's, a VBS group, a small group ministry, or a Sunday gathering, and doing it with the hope that you can help facilitate a meeting with Jesus this morning.
That's amazing. I love that term you use, help facilitate. One of my mentors said, we as church leaders, we don't really do anything because God does the work, but the one thing we do is we try to create space and pray that people encounters God's power and presence in those spaces. And I love the way you think about that. Last bit, every week at staff meeting, we ask for two highlights. Hey, what's one personal highlight and what is one ministry highlight? And you shared a story about a volunteer who moved away. And you told the story about how you saw God at work in his life. And to wrap us up, so much of what your story is about being a young man, really, an elementary school student, right? 5th to 7th grade,
Mm-hmm.
you kind of talk about that season of life and someone seeing you, believing in you, and what that did for you. And now in your ministry, I see you doing that for other folks. There's so many stories, but there's one you told just a few weeks ago in staff meeting. If you remember it, can you close us up? Share that story with us, because it blows my heart away. And it really reminds me about how God is so much bigger than we are. And he's at work in places we could never imagine. Will you end with that amazing story?
Definitely. About 2 years ago, this kid came up to me and was like, "Hey, my friend serves on your team running cameras. I want to join." And I was like, "Awesome. Great. I love having volunteers. I'll never say no to that." I got talking with him and he was like, "Yeah, I'm an atheist." And he's like, "I'm just here because I was at my friend's house on Saturday night and spent the night. So I'm here on Sunday and he had to work today. So I just am along for the ride. And I love cameras. So like, tell me what's going on." And we start developing this relationship where we start talking, and over a lot of coffees, we start talking about Jesus and the Bible and how it differs from, any other faith. Like he was investing in Buddhism at the time and some different meditation techniques and different things like that. And we really just honed in on Jesus and the truth of the scripture. And over time, we started this real relationship where he was asking not just questions about faith in general, but about how he could apply it to his life. And then right as soon as I felt like we were finally breaking ground, his parents accepted a new job offer and they moved out to Colorado. And it was...
So just as you've been investing 2 years of your life, you're starting to see fruit. You're thinking maybe he's coming along. And then all of a sudden, 2 years of investment feels like... Poof.
Yep. So as a parting gift, I just gave him my favorite Bible and Bible study. And I said, "Hey man, like I want to keep walking with you. Like text me, call me, whatever you need. Here's some gifts. Love you, dude. Like God bless. And I hope to hear from you soon." And I reached out a handful of times and got some answers back, but nothing really huge. And then probably around a month ago, he reached out to me and, asked for the name of the Bible study that I had given him and where to buy it. And, because he had started a Bible study with a group of his friends at his school. And he talked about how he was following Jesus now, how he really committed his life. And then he was like, "If I believe it, I got to tell people about it." So he's starting his own Bible study in his own school, but now he's fully on fire for God in a season where I honestly didn't think I'd hear from him again.
Wow. So not only he goes from I'm a devout atheist to if I believe this, I've got to tell other folks about it. I think it's a perfect way to end for two reasons. One is just reminding us that God is always at work in people's lives, even if we can't see it. But the second is I think young folks get a hard time. I think especially from older generations, they say, "Oh, they're not as interested in faith, not as interested in God." And I want to say there's some ways in which it's changed. I think the giving God or church the benefit of the doubt the way maybe previous generations did, I don't think so. Again, trusting authority or the authority of the scriptures the way previous generations did, not so much. But there is a real hunger, a real openness, a real sense of if it is real and it is true and it impacts me, I actually want to go about it. So what I see a whole lot less of is lukewarm going through the motions because it's quote unquote the right things to do. I see a whole lot more folks who are I'm all in or I'm all out, but I'm not just going to fake it and go through it. If I'm actually going to do this, I'm going to tell my friends about this, or I'm not going to do it. And unlike previous generations, I don't have to hide or pretend because I don't have to. But again, I love that line. If I'm going to really believe this, I've got to tell everyone else about it. Thanks for sharing that story, and thanks for sharing these amazing stories about God showing up, again, with your little one, Eli, in your call to faith and ministry, and also in investing in the next generation. As we sign off, any last things that you want to say?
I would just say we are all a product of people that have invested in us.
Yes.
So I think investing in someone that you might not feel is worth it at the time will always be worth it in the end.
I love it. All right. I'm going to get the final word because I always want to. Get out your phone and text someone. Either text someone who's invested in you and tell them thank you, or text someone who God's put on your mind and give them a word of encouragement. Ask them a question, see how they're doing. And who knows, maybe we'll hear more and more stories about life change and how folks are encountering God every single day. Love you. We'll see you soon.